They told me the kirkyard was a graveyard for steel. They didn't tell me the ghosts here still clock in for their shifts. My name is Elias. I took a night shift logistics post at the Gary Railway Junction because the pay was double the state average. It's 2:14 a.m. The air in the observation booth smells like ozone and wet iron. Outside, the fog is so thick it swallows the beams of the industrial floodlights. Gary is a shell of a city, and out here, by the tracks, you feel like the last soul on Earth. I was checking the manifest for a southbound Norfolk Southern freighter when a signal flickered on my monitor. Track 4, manual override. That's impossible. Track 4 has been cold since '98. I looked out the reinforced glass. Through the haze, about 200 yards down, a faint, rhythmic blue light was pulsing. Thump, thump, like a heartbeat. I grabbed my radio. Security, this is Elias in booth 2. We've got a trespasser on track 4. Looks like a signaling lantern. Static. Then a voice that sounded like grinding gravel. Elias, the 305 is early. Switch the rail. There is no 305. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked back at the blue light. It wasn't a lantern. It was a man in a vintage 1950s conductor's uniform, standing perfectly still. But he had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should be, reflecting that sickly blue glow. He started walking, not toward the tracks, but toward my tower. His boots didn't make a sound on the gravel. I scrambled to lock the heavy steel door. My hands were shaking so hard, I dropped my keys. Clatter. The sound echoed in the silent booth. I ducked under the desk, staring at the gap under the door. The blue light began to bleed into the room from the hallway. Then the handle turned, slowly, deliberately. A handwritten note slid under the door. It was yellowed, smelling of ancient soot. It read, "You're in my seat, Elias." I looked up at the monitor. The security camera showed the hallway was empty. But when I looked back at the floor, the note was still there, and someone was breathing right behind my chair. The air in the booth dropped 10 degrees. I didn't need a thermometer to tell me. I could see my own breath crystallizing in the flickering blue light. I stayed pinned under that desk, staring at the gap beneath the heavy steel door. No shadow broke the light, no feet, just that suffocating rhythmic pulsing. Thump, thump. "Security, answer me," I whispered into the radio. My voice was a thin, jagged line. The radio didn't hiss with static this time. It emitted a wet, bubbling sound, like someone trying to speak through a throat filled with pennies. "The 305, Elias. It doesn't stop for red lights." I forced myself to look up, just an inch. Camera 04, the one facing the hallway, was a blizzard of white noise, but camera 09, pointed directly at my observation window from the outside gantry, was crystal clear. In the grainy black and white feed, I saw myself huddled under the desk, a small, pathetic shape, and standing right outside the reinforced glass, 3 stories above the ground, with no ledge to support him, was the conductor. He wasn't floating. He was adhered to the glass like an insect. His smooth, featureless face was pressed flat against the pane. The blue light wasn't coming from a lantern anymore. It was emanating from his skin. Then he tapped. Tink, tink, tink. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of a metal conductor's punch hitting the glass. He was marking the window. "What do you want?" I choked out. my eyes fixed on the monitor. On the screen, the figure didn't move. He had no mouth, but the radio on my desk keyed itself open. "Ticket. You're on the tracks, Elias. Everyone in Gary is on the tracks. We're just waiting for the engine." Suddenly, the floor beneath me began to vibrate. Not a small tremor, a deep tectonic shudder that made the monitors rattle in their mounts. The Kirkyard was dead. There were no engines fueled, no coal burning, no power to the lines. But from the north, from the heart of the abandoned yard, I heard it, the long, mournful shriek of a steam whistle, a sound that hadn't been heard here in 70 years, and it was getting closer. The vibration wasn't just in the floor anymore. It was in my teeth. It felt like my skull was being shaken by a giant hand. I crawled out under the desk, my legs feeling like lead. I had to see. I had to know if I was losing my mind, or if the yard was literally coming back to life. I pressed my face to the cold glass of the observation window. He was gone, but the yard had changed. The rusted, weed-choked tracks were glowing, a low electric blue hum radiating from the steel rails, stretching miles into the darkness. And then I saw the light, a single, blinding white searchlight cutting through the fog from the north. It wasn't moving like a modern train. It was swaying side to side, like a predator tracking scent. The whistle blast was so loud, it shattered a glass coffee mug on my desk. My ears rang, a high-pitched whine competing with the roar of the approaching engine. It was a massive black iron silhouette, a 1920s steam locomotive, but it wasn't burning coal. It trailed thick, oily smoke that glowed with that same necrotic blue light. The radio screamed to life, not a voice this time, but a chorus of dozens of people, all sobbing at once. "Don't let us leave, Elias. Please, don't let the 305 leave." I looked at the switchboard, the manual override for track 4, the one cold since the derailment, was glowing red. If that train hit the curve at the speed it was going, it would plow straight into the chemical storage tanks at the edge of the yard. It would level half the city. I reached for the lever. My hand was inches away when the heavy steel door behind me didn't open. It melted. The metal groaned and sagged, turning into black, viscous sludge, and standing in the doorway was the conductor. He wasn't pressing against the glass anymore. He was inside. He raised a long, spindly hand with too many joints. In it, he held a silver ticket puncher. "The line is closed, Elias, but the cargo is restless." Behind him, in the darkened hallway, I saw them, dozens of pale, featureless faces, bodies translucent and shivering, dressed in the ragged clothes of old steelworkers and travelers. They weren't ghosts, they were fuel. The locomotive roared past the tower, the wind nearly blowing the windows inward. The heat was unbearable, not fire heat, but freezing, dry heat that sucked moisture from my skin. "Switch it," the conductor whispered, leaning closer. His breath smelled like wet earth and copper. "Switch it, and you join the manifest." My hand hovered over the lever. Outside, the 305 screamed toward the curve. Inside, the faceless man waited for my soul. His presence was a gravity that pulled the air from my lungs. Every twitch of that smooth skin strobed the blue light, showing flashes of what the hallway had become. It wasn't a hallway anymore. It was a cattle car. The spirits were packed tight, fused to metal, their essences stripped away to feed the glowing blue fire in the locomotive's belly. "One more seat, Elias. The 305 is always short on one soul." The engine roared toward the curve. The screech of metal on metal was a high-pitched suicide note. If I pulled the lever, I'd save the yard and sign my own manifest. If I didn't, the tanks would explode, and the blast would take me and half the city with it. "Why me?" I choked. He leaned close. Beneath his skin, faint rhythmic pulses writhed. "Because you watched," he whispered. "In Gary, we don't look at the tracks at 3 a.m. You looked. Now you belong to the schedule." He raised the silver puncher. It gleamed like a surgical tool. I looked at the monitor one last time. Seconds to derailment. I gripped the lever. "I'm not going," I hissed. He tilted his head. A clicking sound came from him. He was laughing. He didn't stop me.